The little girl's voice cut through the restaurant like a knife. "Leave my mommy alone." She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Tiny braids adorned with pink and white beads. A second-hand dress 2 sizes too big. Tears streaming down her face as she ran across the marble floor of one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan. Every head turned. Forks froze midair. Conversations died in their throats. But it wasn't the child that made the room go silent. It was the woman she was running toward. The black waitress on her knees, soaked in red wine, being screamed at by a man in a $3,000 suit. And it wasn't the screaming man that made the temperature in that room drop to absolute zero. It was the man sitting in the corner booth, the man who had been watching everything from the moment it started, and the man whose name alone could make judges lose sleep and senators return phone calls at 3 in the morning. Dominic Aurelio, the most powerful crime boss on the Eastern Seaboard, and he had just set down his glass. What happened next would destroy a powerful family, expose a criminal conspiracy worth millions, and change 3 lives in ways none of them could have predicted. Stay with me until the very end, because this story will leave you completely speechless. But before we continue, if you enjoy stories like this, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and tap the bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and smash that like button. It helps more than you know. Now let's get back into it. It was a Friday evening in late October. The kind of New York night where the cold sneaks through your coat and the city lights reflect off wet pavement like scattered diamonds. La Fontaine was not just a restaurant. It was a throne room disguised as a dining room. Tucked into a brownstone on the Upper East Side, it served the kind of people who didn't look at prices. Politicians, hedge fund managers, old money families who had been dining there since their grandfathers cut the ribbon at the opening in 1962. The walls were lined with dark walnut paneling imported from a chateau in Bordeaux. The chandeliers were hand-blown Venetian glass. Every table had fresh white orchids flown in from Thailand twice a week, and every seat was earned, not given. Getting a reservation at La Fontaine required either 6 months of patience or one phone call from the right person. Tonight, every table was full. The air hummed with low conversation, clinking crystal, and the kind of quiet wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. And in the far corner booth, partially hidden by a velvet curtain, sat Dominic Aurelio. At 57 years old, Dominic Aurelio was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through jet-black hair that was always combed back with military precision. His suit was charcoal gray, custom-made by a tailor in Milan who flew to New York twice a year just for him. His watch, a Patek Philippe that had belonged to his father, cost more than most people's houses, and his eyes, dark, calm, observant, missed absolutely nothing. In certain circles, his name was spoken with reverence. In others, with terror. He controlled construction contracts across 3 boroughs, shipping routes through the port of Newark, and enough political influence to tilt city council votes. But Dominic didn't flaunt his power. He didn't need to. Power announced itself when he walked into a room, the way gravity announces itself when you step off a ledge. He had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal investigations, and a war with the Castellano family that left 9 men in the ground. Through all of it, he had never once been convicted of anything. Not a parking ticket, not a noise complaint. Nothing. Because Dominic Aurelio did not make mistakes. Tonight he was having dinner with 2 of his top lieutenants. Carmine, his right hand, a squat, a bulldog-faced man with scarred knuckles who had been with Dominic since they were teenagers running numbers in Little Italy, and Gio, younger, sharper, Ivy League educated, handling the family's legitimate real estate portfolio. The conversation was low. Numbers, territory, a problem with a union boss in Queens who was getting greedy, the usual machinery of empire. But Dominic's attention kept drifting. It drifted to the waitress working Section 3. He had noticed her the moment she started her shift. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. It was the way she moved. There was an economy to her steps, a precision. She carried 3 plates on one arm without wobbling. She refilled water glasses before anyone had to ask. She smiled at every table. Not the fake retail smile that dies at the eyes, but something warmer. Something real. She was also exhausted. Dominic could see it. The slight drag in her left foot. The way she pressed her thumb into her lower back when she thought no one was looking. The dark circles under her eyes that her makeup almost, but not quite, concealed. This woman was running on fumes, and she was doing it with more grace than half the people in this room had ever shown with a full tank. Her name tag read, Grace. Grace Okafor, 29 years old, single mother. She had moved to New York from Baltimore 3 years ago, carrying 2 suitcases, an unfinished nursing degree, and a 6-year-old daughter named Amara. Grace worked the evening shift at La Fontaine 4 nights a week. Mornings, she cleaned offices in a midtown high-rise. The hours in between belonged to textbooks and practice exams for the nursing license that would finally let her breathe. She slept 4 hours a night, sometimes 3, but what kept Grace running, what made her push through the burning feet and the aching back and the bone-deep exhaustion, was a little girl with braids and a laugh like wind chimes. Amara had been diagnosed with autoimmune lymphoproliferative syndrome 8 months ago, ALPS, a rare condition that attacked her immune system from the inside. The treatment was working, but the bills were annihilating everything else. Grace was 3 months behind on rent. Collection agencies called before sunrise. And the only reason Amara was still receiving treatment at Mount Sinai was because Grace had begged the billing department for a payment plan that left exactly $47 a week for everything else. Food, transportation, school supplies, life. Every shift at La Fontaine was a lifeline. Every tip was medicine. Every smile she forced through her exhaustion was another day her daughter stayed alive. So when she walked up to table 12 that Friday evening, she straightened her shoulders, put on her best smile, and prepared to give the best service she possibly could. She had no idea that table 12 was about to try to destroy her. But what she also didn't know, what nobody in that restaurant knew, was that the most dangerous man in New York was watching her. And he had already decided something about Grace Okafor long before the first glass of wine was poured. But we'll get to that. First, let me tell you about the man at table 12. His name was Bradley Thornton III, 42 years old, blonde, ruddy-faced, already drunk before the appetizers arrived. Bradley was the kind of man who introduced himself by his full name and paused afterward, waiting for recognition. Old Connecticut money, Yale legacy, a trust fund that had been compounding since before the Civil War. Bradley didn't work. He had never held a job for more than 6 months. What he did was spend. And what he spent his time on mostly was making sure everyone around him felt smaller than he was. Because the only way Bradley Thornton felt tall was by pushing other people to their knees. He was with 3 friends tonight, all cut from the same cloth. Polo shirts under blazers, loud, braying laughs. The kind of men who snapped their fingers at waitstaff and sent back food just to watch people scramble. Bradley had already sent his steak back twice, once because it was too pink, once because it wasn't pink enough. Both times Grace had smiled, apologized, and relayed the complaint to the kitchen without a flicker of frustration on her face. The head chef, a Frenchman named Pierre who had been cooking for 30 years, had nearly thrown his tongs across the kitchen the second time. "That steak was perfect," Pierre had hissed. "The man is a child." "I know," Grace had said softly, "but children tip, and my daughter needs her medicine." Pierre had looked at her for a long moment. Then he'd prepared the third steak himself, personally, adjusting it by a fraction of a degree, because that was what Grace did to people. As she didn't ask for help. She didn't complain. She just kept going. And somehow that made everyone around her want to go a little further too. But Bradley Thornton wasn't looking for good service. He was looking for a target, and the moment Grace returned with that third steak, he found one. Grace set the plate down carefully. "Your filet, sir." Chef Pierre prepared it personally this time. Medium rare, exactly as you... "Grace." Bradley said her name slowly, deliberately, the way you'd read a label on a specimen jar. "That's a pretty name for a waitress." His eyes traveled from her face down to her name tag and back up. Slowly. "Tell me, Grace, is this really the best you people can do?" The table went quiet. One of his friends, the one named Trent, shifted uncomfortably and looked at his plate. Grace kept her composure. "I'm sorry, sir. Is there something else I can help you with?" Bradley picked up his wine glass, a $200 Burgundy, and swirled it lazily. "I asked for the 2016 vintage. This tastes like a 2018, maybe even a 2019. Can you even tell the difference?" He leaned back and smiled. "Or is that not something they teach where you come from?" The words landed like a slap. 2 tables away, a woman in pearls looked down at her lap. Across the restaurant, a man in a gray suit suddenly became very interested in his breadbasket. The room could feel what was happening, and the room chose to look away. But one person didn't look away. Dominic Aurelio set down his fork. His dark eyes locked onto table 12 like targeting systems. Carmine noticed. "Boss?" Dominic held up one finger. "Wait." Grace took a slow breath. She had dealt with men like Bradley before. In restaurants, in offices, on the subway. Men who fed on discomfort the way parasites fed on blood. The only way to survive them was to give them nothing. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir. Let me check with the sommelier and bring you the correct vintage right away." She reached for the glass. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but for everyone who watched, it unfolded in slow, sickening motion. Bradley pulled the glass away from her hand. He looked her dead in the eyes, and then he tipped it. He poured the entire glass of red wine down the front of her white uniform. Grace gasped. The cold liquid soaked through to her skin instantly. She stumbled backward, her shoes slipping on the wet marble floor, and went down hard on both knees. The sound her kneecaps made when they hit the marble, that sharp, a hollow crack, echoed through the silent restaurant. Bradley looked down at her and laughed. "Maybe now you'll remember which vintage I ordered." His friends laughed too. Nervous, ugly laughter. The kind that fills a room when no one wants to be the first to stop. Grace was on her knees, red wine dripping from her chin, her white uniform turning crimson, her hands shaking as she pressed them against the cold floor, trying to push herself up. The humiliation was total. Every eye in the restaurant was on her. Some people looked away. Some watched with the shameful fascination of an audience at a car wreck. Nobody moved to help, but Grace didn't cry. She would not give him that. She started to rise, jaw clenched, eyes burning. She was going to stand up. She was going to apologize one more time because that was her job. She was going to walk to the kitchen, clean herself off, and finish her shift. Because her daughter needed this job. because $47 a week doesn't leave room for pride. That's what mothers do. They swallow the fire and keep walking. But then Bradley leaned down. He got close. Close enough that Grace could smell the wine on his breath and the cologne that cost more than her monthly rent. And he whispered, loud enough for every nearby table to hear, "Be a good girl and clean that up, on your hands and knees, like you're used to." The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear the kitchen clock ticking from 30 feet away. Grace's hands curled into fists on the cold marble floor. Her nails dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood. And then, a sound that shattered everything. "Mommy!" The scream came from the entrance of the restaurant. Every single head turned. A little girl stood in the doorway. Tiny braids with pink and white beads. A puffy jacket that was slightly too big for her. Light-up sneakers with one lace untied. She was clutching a piece of paper, a drawing wrinkled and smudged with crayon, and her brown eyes were wide with a horror that no 6-year-old should ever have to feel. She had seen everything. Behind her, an older woman, Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who watched Amara in the evenings, appeared in the doorway, out of breath, face stricken with panic. "Grace, I'm so sorry," Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice cracking. "She had a terrible nightmare. She woke up screaming for you and wouldn't stop. She kept saying she needed to show you something. I tried everything. But she got away from me on the subway. I'm so sorry, But Amara wasn't listening. She was already running. Her little light-up sneakers flickered pink and blue against the dark marble as she sprinted across the dining room. She dodged a busboy. She nearly knocked over a water stand. A woman at table 8 instinctively reached out to catch her, but Amara was too fast, and she threw herself at her mother with the full force of a child who believed that love could fix anything in the world. "Leave my mommy alone!" she screamed at Bradley, her tiny body shaking with fury and fear. She pressed herself against Grace like a shield. "You don't hurt my mommy! You don't!" Grace caught her daughter and pulled her close. The drawing crumpled between them, a crayon picture of two stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun, and with the words, "I love you, Mom," written in wobbly, heartbreaking letters across the top. And Grace's composure, the composure she had held through 2 jobs and 3 hours of sleep and 8 months of medical bills and the wine dripping down her face, finally completely shattered. She buried her face in her daughter's hair and cried, kneeling on that cold marble floor, wine-soaked, humiliated, holding the only thing in her life that mattered, surrounded by people who had watched a man break her and done absolutely nothing. Now you would think that seeing a child run to protect her mother, seeing a 6-year-old girl scream in terror at the sight of her mother on her knees, would make any human being stop, reconsider, feel something. But Bradley Thornton III was not any human being. He straightened his blazer, then looked at the child clinging to her mother and said, "Oh, wonderful. Now there's 2 of them making a scene. Somebody call the manager. I want this woman fired immediately. She's obviously not fit to work here if she's bringing her kids into a fine dining." He never finished the sentence, because Bradley heard a sound behind him that turned the words to dust in his throat, the sound of a chair scraping against marble, heavy, deliberate, the sound of Dominic Aurelio standing up. Now let me explain something about this moment, because it's important you understand what it meant. Dominic Aurelio did not stand up during dinner, not for phone calls, not for business, not for anything short of an assassination attempt. In 20 years of dining at La Fontaine, the staff had seen Dominic Aurelio stand up from his corner booth exactly twice. Once when his mother died and Carmine brought him the news, and once when a man pulled a knife on a waiter in 2009. That man was never seen again. So when Dominic stood up, when the entire restaurant heard the slow, deliberate scrape of his chair, something changed in the room, something primal, the way the air changes before a thunderstorm. Carmine set down his glass. "Boss?" Dominic didn't respond. He buttoned his jacket with a single, precise motion. Then he walked. His footsteps were measured, unhurried, each one landing with the weight of absolute certainty. Every person in that restaurant tracked his movement the way prey animals track a predator crossing open ground. He didn't walk to Bradley. He walked to Grace. He stopped 3 feet from where she knelt, holding her daughter. He looked at the wine staining her uniform. And he looked at the child's terrified face pressed against her mother's chest. He looked at the crumpled crayon drawing clutched between them. Then he did something that made Carmine's jaw go slack. Dominic Aurelio reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his handkerchief, Italian silk, monogrammed with his initials in navy thread, and knelt down beside Grace Okafor. He didn't hand it to her. He held it out, palm open, the way you'd offer something to someone whose hands were too full of everything else to reach for it. "Take your time," he said, quietly, gently, just loud enough for Grace and the child to hear. "Nobody's rushing you." Grace looked up. She didn't know who this man was. She just saw steady eyes and an open hand when the rest of the room had given her nothing but silence. "Thank you," she whispered. Amara peeked out from behind her mother's arm. She studied Dominic's face the way children do, without pretense, without agenda, just looking. "Are you going to help my mommy?" she asked, and something shifted behind Dominic's eyes, something tectonic. A fault line that had been sealed for 23 years cracked open. Because he was looking at this little girl, braids, light-up sneakers, a crayon drawing held like a treasure, and he was seeing another little girl, a girl with dark curls and his wife's smile, Isabella, his daughter, who had died of leukemia at age 7 in a hospital room 3 miles from where he now knelt. Isabella, who used to draw pictures of them together, stick figures, a big one and a small one. "Me and Daddy" written across the top. 23 years ago. And the wound had never closed. It had just learned to be quiet. "Yes," Dominic said to Amara. His voice was rough. "I am." He stood up, slowly, the way a storm gathers itself before it breaks. And he turned to face Bradley Thornton III. What happened next is something that 47 people witnessed that night, and not one of them ever forgot. Bradley saw a well-dressed older man walking toward him and made the last mistake of his comfortable life. He assumed this man was an ally. "Can you believe this?" Bradley said, gesturing at Grace and Amara with the hand still holding his wine-stained napkin. "I've been coming to La Fontaine for years, and the service has never been this." "Sit down." 2 words, spoken barely above a whisper. But there was something in Dominic's voice, a depth, a gravity, a weight, that made Bradley's vocal cords freeze mid-syllable. I'm sorry, do I know?" "I said sit down, and I will not say it a third time." One of Bradley's friends, Trent, the one who had been quiet all evening, went rigid, because Trent worked in real estate. Trent had seen this man's photograph in the office of every building commissioner and union boss in the city. Trent knew exactly who was standing 3 feet away from his best friend. "Brad!" Trent grabbed Bradley's sleeve. His face was the color of milk. "Brad, sit down. Right now. Don't say another word." "What? Why? Who the hell is—" "That is Dominic Aurelio. Sit down. Now." The name hit Bradley like a bucket of ice water poured down his spine, because even in the velvet-wrapped, trust-funded, platinum-card world of Bradley Thornton III, the name Dominic Aurelio carried weight. It was the name that appeared in hushed conversations at country clubs, The name connected to buildings that changed hands overnight and men who retired to countries without extradition treaties. Bradley sat, hard, like his knees had stopped working. Dominic didn't raise his voice. He spoke the way surgeons speak, measured, precise, and cutting exactly where he intended. I've been sitting in that booth for 2 hours, Bradley. I watched you send back a perfectly good steak 3 times because you enjoy watching people scramble. I watched you speak to this woman with the kind of contempt that only comes from a man who has never been humbled. I watched you pour $200 of burgundy down her uniform. I watched you tell her to get on her hands and knees. He let the silence hang. And then I watched you say those things while her 6-year-old daughter stood 10 feet away, watching her mother be treated like she was nothing. Bradley opened his mouth. Nothing came out. You know what I see when I look at you? Dominic said. He waited, like he genuinely expected an answer. The silence was excruciating. I see a man who has never once in his entire life earned a single thing. Not your money, not your education, not your name, not even the chair you're sitting in right now. Everything you have was handed to you, and because it was all handed to you, you think you have the right to take from anyone. You look at that woman and you see someone beneath you because she wears a uniform and you wear a suit somebody else paid for. Dominic glanced over his shoulder at Grace, who was standing now, holding Amara on her hip. The child had her arms wrapped around her mother's neck, and the crumpled drawing was still clutched in her small fist. Let me tell you what I see when I look at her, Dominic continued, turning back to Bradley. I see a woman who works 2 jobs, who studies for her nursing license in the middle of the night while her daughter sleeps, who hasn't slept more than 4 hours in 8 months because her little girl is fighting an illness that would break most people, who came to work tonight with a smile on her face because she understands something that you, with all your money in your name and your $3,000 suit, will never understand. He leaned in, close, so that only Bradley could hear the next words. Dignity is not something you inherit. It's something you build with your bare hands. And that woman has more of it in her little finger than your entire family has produced in 4 generations. Bradley was trembling, actually trembling. His hands were shaking so badly that the silverware rattled on the table. How? He stammered. How do you know all that about her? Because I pay attention to people, Bradley. You should try it sometime. You might learn something about the world you've been sleepwalking through. Dominic straightened up. He turned to the other 3 men at the table. Every one of them looked like they were attending their own funeral. Gentlemen, your evening at La Fontaine is over. You will pay your bill in full. You will add a 40% gratuity, and every cent of that gratuity goes directly to Grace. You will then leave this restaurant quietly, and you will never, and I want you to hear this clearly, never set foot in this establishment again. Trent raised a shaking hand. Mr. Aurelio, sir, the bill is almost $4,000. Then I suggest you tip accordingly. Consider it a lesson in human decency, the most expensive education you'll ever receive and the only one worth paying for. The 4 men scrambled for their wallets like their lives depended on it, because in a way they were only beginning to understand they did. Now, if you think this is where the story ends, with 4 rich men paying their bill and running away with their tails between their legs, you're wrong. Because what Dominic did next set off a chain of events that would make Bradley Thornton's life collapse like a house of cards. And what Dominic discovered about Grace that night would break him wide open. But first, something else was happening. Something nobody in that restaurant knew about. Something that would put Grace and her daughter directly in the crosshairs of a threat far worse than Bradley Thornton. Keep watching. This is where it gets real. The four men at table 12 left behind a check for $6,700. It included the largest tip Grace Okafor had ever received in her life. But Dominic wasn't watching them leave. He was watching Madame Leclerc. Catherine Leclerc, the owner of La Fontaine, had emerged from her office during the confrontation. She was a severe woman. Silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of posture that suggested a spine made of rebar. She had watched the entire scene unfold with the expression of someone calculating damages. Now she was walking toward Grace. "Grace," Madame Leclerc said crisply, "you are a mess. Go clean yourself up. I'll have someone cover your tables." Then she added 5 words that made Dominic's blood turn to ice. "And bring Amara to my office." Grace froze. "What?" "Your child cannot be on the dining floor. It is a health code violation and a liability issue. I need to document this incident. Bring her to my office and we'll discuss your employment status after your shift." Employment status. Grace understood the language immediately. She had heard it before. At the office cleaning company when she'd been 2 minutes late because Amara's treatment ran over. At the grocery store job she'd lost because she needed a day off for a hospital appointment. Employment status meant you're about to be fired, and we're looking for the cleanest way to do it. Grace's face went gray. She clutched Amara tighter. "Madame Leclerc, please, it wasn't my fault. The customer poured." "I saw what happened, Grace, but we have policies. A child on the dining floor during service is—" "Catherine," Dominic's voice, calm, conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. Madame Leclerc turned. The moment she met his eyes, the blood drained from her face, because Madame Leclerc knew exactly who Dominic Aurelio was. Everyone in New York's restaurant world did. He was a silent partner in a dozen establishments across the city. He was also, as it happened, the owner of the building La Fontaine leased. In the building, Catherine Leclerc wrote a rent check for every month, a rent check that went into Dominic Aurelio's accounts. "Dominic," she said carefully, "this is a staffing matter." "No, it's not. This woman was assaulted on your floor by a customer who has been sending back food all night, and your first instinct is to threaten her job." "I wasn't threatening." "Catherine, I own this building. I've been a patron of this restaurant for 20 years. In that time, I've never once told you how to run your business. I'm telling you now." He paused. "Grace keeps her job. She takes the rest of the night off with full pay. Her daughter stays with her. And if I ever hear that this incident was used against her in any way, a bad schedule, a reduced section, nay, whisper to another manager, I will take a personal interest in La Fontaine's lease renewal. Are we clear?" Madame Leclerc swallowed. "Crystal clear." "Good. Now, I'd like to use your private dining room. I want to speak with Grace." Madame Leclerc gestured toward the back hallway without another word. And that's when something unexpected happened. Something that shifted the entire story. Grace followed Dominic into the private dining room, carrying Amara on her hip. She didn't know why she trusted this stranger. Maybe it was the handkerchief. Maybe it was the way he had looked at Amara, not with pity, but with something older. Something that looked like grief wearing the mask of recognition. The private dining room was small and warm. Dark wood, a single table, candles that had been lit for a party that never arrived. "Yes, please," Dominic said, pulling out a chair. "Sit down. You've earned it." Grace sat. Amara crawled off her hip and onto the chair beside her, still clutching the drawing. Dominic sat across from them, and for a long moment he just looked at the little girl. The braids, the beads, the light-up sneakers kicking softly against the chair legs. Amara stared back at him with zero fear. Children are strange that way. They sense danger and kindness in equal measure, and they are rarely wrong about either. "What's your name?" Dominic asked her. Not her mother. Her. Amara. That's a beautiful name. Do you know what it means? Mommy says it means grace, like her name, but different. Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your mommy's right. In Igbo, it means grace. In other languages, it means immortal, eternal, something that never dies. Grace stared at him. How do you know that? My wife was a linguist. She loved names. She used to say that the name you give a child is the first promise you make them. He paused. The past tense hung in the air like smoke. What promise did you make Amara? Grace looked at her daughter. Amara was busy smoothing out the wrinkled drawing, trying to fix the crease that had cut through the yellow sun. That she would always be loved, Grace said quietly, no matter what. Dominic nodded slowly. Then he looked at the medical bracelet on Amara's wrist, thin, purple, with a Mount Sinai logo and a barcode. ALPS? He asked. Grace stiffened. How did you? I recognized the bracelet. Mount Sinai uses that specific band for their long-term pediatric autoimmune program. He paused. My daughter spent 14 months in that program. Different wing, different disease, same bracelets. Your daughter? Isabella. She would have been 30 this year. The room went very still. Would have been, Grace repeated softly. Leukemia. She was 7 when we lost her. Same age as your daughter, almost to the month. Amara looked up from her drawing. Is Isabella in heaven? Dominic's throat worked. Yes, sweetheart, she is. My friend Marcus at the hospital went to heaven too. Mommy says he's not sick anymore up there. Something broke across Dominic's face. Not dramatically, not with tears or trembling, just a hairline fracture in the granite, visible only if you knew what you were looking for. Grace knew, because she had the same fracture in her own foundation. Your mommy's right about that too, Dominic managed. And in that moment, in a candlelit room in the back of a restaurant where she had been humiliated 30 minutes ago, Grace understood something about this man that his enemies and allies and lieutenants had never been allowed to see. He wasn't powerful in spite of his pain. He was powerful because of it. He had turned loss into an engine, and that engine had built an empire. But the engine ran on grief, and grief was the loneliest fuel in the world. Dominic's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. His expression didn't change, but Grace noticed his hand go still, the way a man's hand goes still when it wants to reach for a weapon. Excuse me for one moment. He stepped into the hallway. Grace could hear fragments through the door. When? How many? The Thornton account specifically? Pull everything. My every transaction, every signature. I want it tonight. He returned to the room. His face was calm, but his eyes had changed. They were harder now, colder. The man who had knelt beside her with a handkerchief was still there, but behind him stood someone else entirely. Someone who solved problems that couldn't be solved with kindness. Grace, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Okay. The man who poured wine on you tonight, Bradley Thornton, has he been here before? Grace nodded slowly. He comes in every few weeks, always with different people, always makes a scene, tips badly, complains about everything. Has he ever done anything like this before? To you or any other server? Grace hesitated, and Dominic saw it. That split-second pause that told him everything. Quug, he grabbed a server's arm last month, Grace said quietly. A girl named Mia left a bruise. Mia reported it to Madame Leclerc. And? Madame Leclerc said the customer is always right and gave Mia the weekend off without pay. Dominic's jaw tightened. What happened to Mia? She quit. She couldn't afford to miss a weekend. She had student loans. And no one reported Bradley. He's a Thornton, Mr. Grace trailed off. She realized she didn't even know his name. Aurelio, Dominic, Mr. Aurelio. The Thorntons are on the board of half the restaurants in Manhattan. You report a Thornton, you don't just lose one job, you lose all of them. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made Grace's blood go cold. Grace, when the phone call I just received, my people ran a preliminary check on Bradley Thornton as a matter of routine. What they found wasn't routine. Bradley's trust fund is connected to a real estate portfolio. 3 buildings. On paper, they're commercial investments, but the money flowing through those buildings doesn't match the rental income. Not even close. What does that mean? It means Bradley Thornton has been signing his name to properties that are being used to launder money, millions of dollars, stolen from elderly investors through a fraud scheme run by his family's financial advisor. Grace stared at him. Bradley's a criminal? Bradley is a useful idiot. He signs what he's told to sign because he doesn't ask questions and doesn't care. But his name is on the deeds, and that makes him legally liable. Why are you telling me this? Dominic leaned forward. Because the man who poured wine on you tonight and told you to get on your knees isn't just an entitled bully, Grace. He's part of a machine that has been stealing from vulnerable people for years. Retirees, pension funds, people who trusted someone to protect their savings and got robbed instead. He paused. I'm going to make sure the right people find out about it. Not for revenge, because it's the right thing to do. But I wanted you to know why. I wanted you to know that the man who humiliated you tonight, his entire world is about to collapse, and it has nothing to do with wine. Grace looked at Amara, who had fallen asleep in the chair, the drawing still clutched in her small hand. Then she looked at Dominic. I don't want revenge, she said. I just want to go home and hold my daughter. I know, Dominic said, and you will. But first, there's something else I need to tell you. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Plain white, no name, just a phone number. Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive a phone call from Mount Sinai's Financial Assistance Office. They're going to tell you that Amara's treatment has been fully funded. All current and future costs. This is not a loan. There are no conditions. There is no debt. Grace's hands began to shake. I can't accept. You're not accepting anything from me. You're accepting it from the Isabella Aurelio Foundation. It was set up 14 years ago to fund pediatric treatment for families who can't afford it. Your daughter qualifies. I simply made sure her file moved to the top of the pile. Tears were running down Grace's face now. She wasn't wiping them away. Why? She whispered. Because 23 years ago, my daughter died in that hospital, and I couldn't save her. I had all the money in the world, and none of it mattered. I built a foundation in her name so that other fathers, other mothers, wouldn't have to feel what I felt. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I built it. I got buried in business and territory and power, and the foundation became just another line in a spreadsheet. He looked at Amara, sleeping with her drawing. Then tonight, your daughter ran across a restaurant to protect you. And I saw Isabella, I saw my little girl, and I remembered. His voice was rough now, almost broken. You reminded me, Grace. Both of you. But you reminded me why any of this matters. What happened over the next 72 hours sent shockwaves through New York's elite circles. Saturday morning, Dominic met with Carmine and Gio in his office in Red Hook. The file on Bradley Thornton was 3 inches thick. It's worse than we thought, Gio said, laying out documents across the table. 3 buildings laundering money through inflated renovation contracts. The financial advisor, a man named Whitfield, has been running this for 6 years. He picks elderly clients, moves their retirement funds into these properties as investments, skims the returns, and funnels the real profits through shell companies in Delaware. How many victims? Dominic asked. 47 that we can identify. Total losses estimated at 12 million. Dominic looked at the documents for a long time. The Thorntons have been hiding behind their name for generations, Carmine said. Nobody touches them. Not the DA, not the press. They've got donors on every campaign committee in the state. Nobody's touched them yet, Dominic corrected. He picked up his phone. Angela, he said. Angela Moretti was a federal prosecutor he had never bribed, never threatened, and never needed to. She owed him nothing, which was exactly why she trusted him. I'm sending you a package, anonymous. You'll want to open it before Monday. On Monday morning, a manila envelope arrived at the Southern District of New York Federal Courthouse. No fingerprints, no return address. Inside was a USB drive containing financial records, property deeds, transaction histories, and a list of 47 names. 47 people who had been robbed of their retirement savings by a man named Whitfield, enabled by a family named Thornton. By Wednesday, Bradley Thornton III was served with a federal subpoena at his penthouse in Greenwich, Connecticut. He opened the door in his bathrobe. The two FBI agents didn't bother to sit down. By Friday, his assets were frozen, his bank accounts locked, his credit cards declined at the restaurant where he was trying to have lunch. The maitre d' had to ask him to leave. Bradley Thornton, who had never in his life been asked to leave anywhere, walked out of that restaurant with his head down. Within 2 months, 3 members of the Thornton family would face indictment for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Whitfield, the financial advisor, would receive 14 years in federal prison. Bradley himself would cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His community service assignment? Serving meals at a women's shelter in the Bronx, 3 nights a week. For 2 years, he served those meals quietly. He never sent one back. But all of that, was only half the story. Because while Bradley Thornton's world was collapsing, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something that would prove that this story was never about justice at all. It was about redemption. Over the following weeks, Grace's life began to change in ways she couldn't fully explain. The call from Mount Sinai came exactly as Dominic had said it would. Amara's treatment was fully covered, current and future. Grace sat on her kitchen floor after that phone call and cried until she couldn't breathe. Then other things began to happen. Her landlord called to say her back rent had been cleared and her lease renewed at a reduced rate. She assumed it was an error. It wasn't. A scholarship appeared at her nursing program, the Isabella Aurelio Memorial Scholarship for Working Parents, that covered her remaining tuition, books, and a monthly stipend for childcare. She was the first recipient. A new after-school enrichment program opened 4 blocks from her apartment. It was specifically designed for children with chronic health conditions, art therapy, tutoring, a full-time nurse on staff. Amara was the first child enrolled. On her first day, she came home and told Grace she had made 3 friends. Grace never found out who was behind all of it. She suspected the man from the restaurant, but she had no way to reach him. No name on the card. The phone number went to an answering service that took messages and never returned calls. All she had was a monogrammed handkerchief she tried to return through Madame Leclerc. Leclerc had smiled, the first genuine smile Grace had ever seen on that woman's face, and said, "Keep it, dear. He wanted you to have it." 6 months passed. Grace Okafor passed her nursing licensing exam, top 3 in her class. She was offered a position at Mount Sinai Hospital, the same hospital treating her daughter. A real salary, benefits, a schedule that let her see Amara in the evenings. For the first time in years, Grace slept through the night. On her first day as a registered nurse, she walked through the hospital lobby in scrubs that fit her perfectly. Her back was straight, her head was high, and the dark circles under her eyes were gone. She looked like a different person. She was a different person. She passed the pediatric wing where Amara had her checkups. She passed the nursing station where she would be assigned. She turned a corner toward orientation, and she stopped. Because sitting alone in the waiting room of the pediatric oncology ward, the ward where the sickest children were treated, was Dominic Aurelio. No bodyguards, no entourage, no lieutenants. Just a man in an expensive coat that seemed too big for him, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, staring at a door that hadn't opened in 23 years. Grace walked over to him. She sat down in the chair beside his. She didn't ask permission. She just sat. They were quiet for a long time. "It's you," she finally said. Dominic looked at her. Ina took him a moment. She looked so different in scrubs, without the exhaustion, without the fear. Then something warm cracked through the granite of his expression. "Grace, you made it. Because of you, the treatment, the scholarship, the after-school program, the lease, all of it." He didn't deny it. He just looked at the lilies in his hands. "Today is Isabella's birthday," he said. "She would have been 30. Every year I come here. This waiting room is where I spent most of her last year. I bring flowers and I sit and I remember what her laugh sounded like. Some years I can still hear it. Some years I can't." Grace didn't say she was sorry. She didn't offer empty comfort. She had lived inside enough grief to know that words couldn't touch it. Only presence could, so she just sat with him. After a while, Dominic reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, soft from handling. He unfolded it carefully. It was Amara's drawing, the two stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. "I love you, Mom," in wobbly crayon letters. "Your daughter left this at the restaurant that night," he said. "I kept it. I hope you don't mind." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "It reminded me of a drawing Isabella made me once." Dominic continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Two stick figures, a big one and a small one. She wrote me and Daddy across the top in purple crayon. I kept it in my wallet for 15 years. Then one day it was gone. I don't know when I lost it. I tore my house apart. I tore my office apart. I almost tore my life apart looking for that drawing." His voice broke. "Just slightly. Just enough. But maybe that's the thing about the people we love. We don't get to keep every piece of them. We just carry what we can and hope it's enough." Grace reached out and placed her hand over his. The crime boss and the nurse, the grieving father and the fighting mother. Two people who had been broken by the world in different ways and put themselves back together with different tools, one with power, one with persistence, but who understood in that moment that they were built from the same material. "It's enough," Grace said. "It's always enough." Dominic looked at her. For the first time in 23 years, his eyes were full of tears that he didn't bother to hide. And in that hospital waiting room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the shuffle of footsteps and the quiet, relentless work of people trying to keep children alive, something healed. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. 3 years later, Amara Okafor was 9 years old and in full remission. She still drew pictures, better ones now, with proportions and shading and backgrounds that her art teacher called remarkable for her age. But every year on the same day, she made one drawing in the old style: stick figures, crayon, a yellow sun. One was for her mother, one was for Mr. D. She'd been making them since that night in the restaurant, and Dominic had kept every single one. They were pinned to a corkboard in his office, the same office where he conducted business that shaped the city's underground. Right next to financial reports and development plans, there were 9 crayon drawings made by a little girl who had once run across a marble floor in light-up sneakers to save her mother. His men never asked about the drawings. They didn't need to, because even in the darkest corners of the world, there are things that glow. And sometimes the most powerful thing a powerful man can do is kneel down on a restaurant floor and offer his handkerchief to a woman the rest of the world had decided not to see. Not because he has to, but because he remembers what it's like to love someone small enough to carry, but too important to ever set down. And that is the story of the waitress, the mafia boss, and the little girl whose crayon drawing changed everything. Now I have to ask you, if you were in that restaurant that night, would you have stood up? Or would you have looked away like everyone else? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and the conversations down there are always incredible. If this story hit you, if you felt something, then smash that like button. It tells the algorithm to show this story to more people, and honestly, more people need to hear this one. And if you're not subscribed yet, I need you to fix that right now. Hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, because we tell stories like this every single week. And the next one? Let me just say, it involves a little boy, a hospital bed, and a mafia boss who showed up with an army. You do not want to miss it. Subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Stay blessed, stay kind, and never ever underestimate the power of standing up when the whole room sits down.